Great.
Welcome, everyone. We're just going to wait a few moments and give folks time to join us. Welcome, welcome.
Yes, welcome everybody.
Welcome. We'll wait a little bit longer as people are still rolling in.
I'm Jim Wright, and nice to see everybody tonight.
All right, I think we are officially going to get started. Hello,
Great.
everyone, and welcome to Hawk Mountain Sanctuary's Stay at Home Speaker Series. Today's program is Meet the Real James Bond with Jim Wright, author, nature photographer, and prize-winning journalist. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, thanks for inviting me tonight. Should I get rolling or?
We'll go through a few things first. So.
Okay, great.
And Jim, we are so glad you are joining us. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us. We're so glad that you are here with us. As you may know, Hawk Mountain is the world's very first refuge for birds of prey. And we continue to work hard to be leaders in raptor conservation, science, and education locally and around the world. Hawk Mountain is a private nonprofit, and membership is the lifeblood of our organization. To all of our members, thank you so much for your continued support. We literally could not do what we do without you. And for those of you joining us tonight who are not members, we appreciate you as well, and we hope you consider becoming one in the future. Hawk Mountain hopes that everyone remains safe and healthy during these challenging times, and we are so thrilled that we are able to provide our local and global community a variety of free virtual programming. As always, Hawk Mountain greatly appreciates donations. Just so everyone is aware, today's program is being recorded. The video will then be accessible on Hawk Mountain's YouTube channel as a continued resource. We also have a link on our website directly connecting you to our YouTube channel. At any point during today's program, viewers can submit their questions through the Q&A feature on the Zoom platform. We've designated time at the end of the program to take some questions from the audience. And we are so excited that the wonderful Jim Wright is joining us today to share with us his new book, The Real James Bond. And before we jump into the presentation, I'd like to take a moment to share some of Jim's background information with our audience. Jim Wright is the author of The Real James Bond, a biography of the author and birdman who fell prey to the world's most famous case of identity theft. The Wall Street Journal called it slim and elegant, like Bond himself. It is available as a hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. A longtime prize-winning journalist, Jim has written lavishly illustrated nature books about Central America's largest rainforest, Pennsylvania's legendary Hawk Mountain, and the New Jersey Meadowlands. Wright is a nature photographer and blogger. He writes the Birdwatcher column for USA Today newspapers in New Jersey. He lives with his wife, Patty, in Allendale, New Jersey, where he is a marsh warden and leading a campaign to ban the nastiest rat poisons. He is currently working on a book about screech owls for Timber Press and hopes he'll be invited back to Hawk Mountain. So let me tell you, Jim, you're always welcome at Hawk Mountain.
Great, thank you.
Yes. So Jim, what inspired you to pursue a career in writing?
Ever since I was a little kid, I've always wanted to write. Believe it or not, when I was in the 3rd grade, I started a neighborhood newspaper. I didn't know what it's scary. So I just had this urge to write. And I think when I finally started writing about nature, I found my strong suit because I really love doing that.
Well, you're clearly so passionate about it. And, you know, I was just doing a little light reading at my house, Jim, and there's this book, this wonderful book. So you've written a book about Hawk Mountain in the past, and you're visiting Hawk Mountain again to work on another book. Would you mind telling us a bit more about these 2 projects and what drew you to Hawk Mountain?
Well, Hawk Mountain, I was doing a story for the newspaper. They wanted day trips. So I said, maybe I'll go to this place called Hawk Mountain. And as soon as I got here, I said, oh my goodness, the history of the place. And I love histories of places. And this is hallowed ground to me. Hawk Mountain is so incredibly special. I just had to write about it. And once I got here, I said, I've got to write a book. And when I say that, I often write a book. So I just learned so much. It was great. And screech owls, I have screech owls in my backyard. They haven't shown up this year, but for about 15 years, I've had them with a camera and fell in love with them and just want to know more and more. And I know a lot of people would like to know more about the screech owls in their lives as well.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so glad you're writing these books, and it's so wonderful you're visiting Hawk Mountain to do a little research on the screech owl. So we're so glad this worked out. So we have people who are interested to learn about the real James Bond. So Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you. If
Great.
You share your screen.
I'm going to start sharing the screen, hit some buttons, and hope everything works. Hopefully everyone can see that. I'll get started here, and I'm going to have a little public service announcement when I get started, and that is just about those nasty rat poisons that Jamie talked about. And before I start, I want to thank Jamie and Hawk Mountain and the Acopian Center and Lori Goodrich for inviting me here and being such wonderful hosts. Protecting our region's raptors. The past couple of years, I've had some tough times with these things called rat poison bait stations. They look like that. And in my hometown, they have been everywhere. I think there's up to 70 of these things filled with some nasty poisons. They're called rat poison bait stations, and they kill more than rats. This is a great horned owl I photographed in December 2020 in my hometown. The next morning, my friend showed up holding the owl in a towel and said, Jim, the owl you photographed is dying. I took it to the Raptor Trust with my wife, and the great horned owl died in her arms on the way to the Raptor Trust. I suspected it had eaten rat poison, and I asked the state to do a necropsy on the owl. It turned out it had eaten a rat that had eaten rat poison from a bait station. Cooper's hawks, the same thing. Made a big comeback in recent years, but we've had at least 2 of these hawks die of rat poisons in my hometown. And so and I also had a great horned owl last week in a nearby town died. And my fear is that these dead raptors are the tip of the iceberg. Most raptors, when they die, no one gives them to me or anyone else. They're dragged off or just thrown away. And I think it's a far bigger problem than we realize. So this is a picture of an open dumpster with a rat poison dispenser next to it. You can't get rid of rats if you have open dumpsters. So it's time to put an end to this. California's banned these poison dispensers. Massachusetts is considering it. I'm doing a campaign in New Jersey, and I'd love to see Pennsylvania take a stand as well. These rat poisons are in our environment now. More than 82% of 133 eagles tested for rodenticides in their bodies had it. I mean, it's like the next DDT if we're not careful. I wanted to thank the California-based Raptors of the Solution for their help with this problem. They've been tremendous. So if you have any questions, you can email me at writejamesb@gmail.com. Okay, so on a happier note, and that's the end of the really depressing stuff, I promise. Spring is here. I took these pictures today, not far from the Acopian Center. Bluebirds nesting, just awesome. And this is a picture of a red-tailed hawk flying outside the Acopian Center. Probably stopped by to say thank you to everybody. Okay, so on with the talk. This is The Real James Bond, about my book, and just great to be here. I want to thank Hawk Mountain Sanctuary for hosting this event and for your hospitality. I took this picture on Tuesday, and I think that is the last blue skies I've seen since I've been here. This is a little clip from the opening of Goldfinger to give you a taste of the other James Bond. And also, this is the first time I think the fictional James Bond posed as a bird. So let's give it a shot. You have to watch very closely. This is the opening of Goldfinger, by the way. Is that a gull swimming ashore? So I think that's where the term gullible came from. So a little about me. I'm from Philadelphia, just like the real James Bond. I'm 6'2", like Bond. I love birds, like Jim Bond. And as you can see, I'm from Philadelphia, and that's from Western Philadelphia. And also, like the real James Bond, I go by Jim, not James. So I guess I was destined to write the book. Here's some of the books I've written, including Hawk Mountain, and one about the Meadowlands, and one about Central America. And I'll tell you how to get the Hawk Mountain book signed by me and the wonderful photographer Kevin Watson at the end of the show. So who was the real James Bond? There was a Trivia Genius quiz online and asked who was the real James Bond named, who was James Bond named after? A real life spy, the creator's neighbor, an ornithologist, or a UK prime minister? I was very depressed to find out that only like 28% got the answer right, an ornithologist. So who is the real James Bond? This guy just had his last 007 movie come out. This guy, or the real deal? And that's a picture of Jim Bond at the Willow Grove Air Show. I wanted to get his picture next to an Aston Martin, and can't blame him. So a little about the book. It is 128 pages. It's full of really cool illustrations and all kinds of background about the real James Bond, the history of ornithology, and some really, as you can see, some really cool images here. One of the highlights of putting the book out was I actually made the British tabloids, and I share this with you here. Of course, in pure tabloid fashion, they say 007 creator stole the name of the naturalist who also had a license to kill birds. I was a little disappointed that I didn't make the front cover, but something about Kate and Meghan made the front cover, and I'm assuming they're also ornithologists. So this is a taste of the book. Jamie mentioned that it's an ebook, and this is Raphael Corkill reading a bit of the introduction.
Introduction. A spy is born. The name of a man is a numbing blow from which he never recovers. Marshall McLuhan, Understanding Media. This is the story of the most notorious case of identity theft in history. Long before Ian Lancaster Fleming became a best-selling author, a single-minded Philadelphia ornithologist named James Bond wrote Birds of the West Indies, based on repeated expeditions to the Bahamas and the Caribbean from 1927 to 1935. The 480-page book, published in 1936, featured black and white line drawings of birds by noted artist Earl Poole. It quickly became the must-have book on the subject. Fast forward to early 1952. Fleming was starting to flesh out his maiden 007 novel, Casino Royale, and needed a name for his imaginary secret agent. As he would often do when inventing characters for his books, Fleming simply lifted a name from real life. He looked at the distinctive white dust jacket of Birds of the West Indies on his bookshelf, noted the author's name in capital letters, and took it. James Bond. Period. No middle name, not even a middle initial. Just 9 purloined letters. A spy was born.
And that was Goldeneye, by the way, Ian Fleming's place in Jamaica. So a little about James Bond. When I started the book, I knew next to nothing about him. One thing I learned fairly quickly was he grew up fairly rich. His mother was a Roebling of the Brooklyn Bridge building Roeblings, and that's her on the left and Jim on the right, and his older brother Francis in the middle. The guy on the right is Francis Sr. He was a founding partner of E.B. Smith and Company, better known as Smith and Barney, which made money the old-fashioned way. And they were extremely wealthy. Jim Bond's father actually was a part owner of the Philadelphia Phillies in 1903 until the stadium bleachers collapsed, and Bond decided he better sell his interest in the Philadelphia Phillies before he got sued. So he was an owner for about 9 months. That collapse of the Baker Field, by the way, was the biggest tragedy. I think like 60 people died in the collapse, and that sort of put the Bonds on a stretch of really bad luck. That summer, Jim Bond's older sister Maggie died of a ruptured appendix in Maine, where they used to spend their summer vacations. And Bond's father was such a big deal, it made the local newspapers at how he raced to his dying daughter, traveling by a special train and yacht to Maine in time to see her the night before she died. Perhaps to drown their sorrows, the Bonds built this mansion called Willowbrook in northeast Philadelphia suburbs, and it's a palatial estate with 300 acres, and it is now the Gwynedd Mercy University, and the administration building is the house you see there, Bond's old childhood home. Soon after, tragedy struck again, and Jim Bond's mother died. Jim Bond's father remarried fairly quickly, married a British widow, gave her Willowbrook as a wedding present, and then moved Jim Bond and his brother to England. And it turns out that Jim Bond, like the 007, was educated in Britain. He first went to the Harrow School, where his name is still carved into the wall there. And he then went to Cambridge. And on the way, he also spent his summers in Maine with his uncle, Carroll Sargent Tyson, who was a pretty well-known artist in his own right. He painted a thing called the Birds of Mount Desert Island, and there are 20 fine arts prints modeled after Audubon. And the family rumor is that just as Audubon shot the birds for these paintings, Jim Bond shot like that snowy owl for the painting that Tyson did of these amazing creatures. I know it sounds harsh these days to think of people shooting birds for paintings, but in those days there really were no color photography, nothing of the sort, and the best way for people to see these birds was through these fine arts prints. Bond and his uncle also wrote The Birds of Mount Desert Island, and if you can get a copy of this, it's a total hoot. They had a great sense of humor when they wrote it. My favorite description is of the American crow, which is well known and widespread on Mount Desert Island, where it is jokingly referred to by some of the natives as soup meat. Ironically, although Carroll Tyson is a very famous artist, has paintings in the White House collection, he is better known for a painting he owned than one he painted. He owned Sunflowers by Vincent van Gogh, one of 7 of the series of sunflowers. It's the only one in North America. And when Tyson got it home, he decided he really didn't like it that much. And he put it behind his seat at the dining room table so he wouldn't have to look at it. And the good news is, if you go to the Philadelphia Museum of Art and you go to the big rotunda there, Tyson donated the painting to the museum. The Tyson family donated it, and you can see it, even if Tyson himself didn't like it. So James Bond, after Harrow, went to Cambridge University. He was a sort of an okay student, but didn't really like, he studied finance. And when he got out of school, he got a job at a bank in Philadelphia and really didn't like it whatsoever. And he lasted a few months and decided, he got a small windfall and decided if he saved his money, spent it very wisely, he could get a job at the Academy of Natural Sciences as an ornithologist. He was a naturalist as a kid and just thought this would be a dream job for himself. He did not get paid, so it was easier to get a job that way. And he started in 1925 and was still working with the Academy in 1989 when he died. So it was 64 years of his life he spent as an ornithologist with the Academy of Natural Sciences. He pretty early on realized that his mission in life was to study the birds of the West Indies. As you can see, that is a lot of islands and a lot of water. And James Bond would travel by mail ship to get down to the West Indies, and he would be able to, it was like one of those city buses where you can hop on and hop off whenever you like. And Bond would go to an island, explore the birds for a month, and then hop back on the next mail ship, go to the next island. And he would spend half the year doing this. One of the problems was Bond got seasick. And so he really went through a lot for his love of his life. When he got to these islands, he traveled by either on foot or on horseback, and this is where he stayed. He liked to stay with local people, and he would use them to help him find the birds. This is a charcoal burner's hut in the Zapata swamp in Cuba, and Bond lived there for a few months, documenting the birds of the Zapata swamp, and actually lived off eating the local rodents. So you always think about these expeditions of the famous expeditions, the West Indies and elsewhere, by all these rich guys, and this was just the opposite. It wasn't a bunch of guys with porters and gourmet meals. Bond just roughed it by himself. The tools of his trade, this is James Bond's penknife, and it is at the Academy of Natural Sciences, and the archivist showed me the blade and pulled it out and said, look at this. He had a blade that says "for flesh only," which sounded like the name of a 007 novel. The other tool of his trade was arsenic, used to preserve the birds and get rid of some of the weird bugs that would infest them. Bond also used a double-barreled shotgun to collect the birds. I know that sounds harsh, but the one thing that Bond was criticized for was he did not shoot enough birds. He believed in shooting the bare minimum necessary for science and not one more. And these days, the birds that Bond collected are extremely valuable for research, and they're still finding out whether birds are species or subspecies based on birds that Bond shot back in the 1920s. So after about 10 years of traveling to the West Indies, James Bond put out Birds of the West Indies, which is just an iconic book at this point. It was published by the Academy of Natural Sciences because Bond took it to the Lippincott Company in Philadelphia, and Joe Lippincott himself said, "Sorry, this is something for the museums, not for a publisher." Turns out Joe was wrong. The book in its various editions stayed in print for more than 6 decades. And I've been trying to collect them, and I haven't gotten all of them yet, but they're pretty much filling up a bookshelf. The Birds of the West Indies, by the way, this is a docudrama and stars Sean Connery's son as Ian Fleming. And it shows you the value of owning a copy of Birds of the West Indies.
Can I come in?
What time do you leave?
11 o'clock.
What's this?
Present.
Oh, Ian. How did you know?
Anyway, you get the idea. So if you ever want a hot date, get yourself a copy of Birds of the West Indies. I also came across this clip of Ian Fleming himself explaining how he chose the name James Bond for his secret agent.
Mr. Fleming, how does an author tackle the problem of selecting a name for the hero of his stories?
Well, it isn't only the hero. I mean, I would pick up names just driving through the countryside, through villages and so on. You'll see an interesting name over a tobacconist or chemist or something of that sort in any country in the world. But when I started to write these books in 1952, I wanted to find a name which wouldn't have any of this romantic overtones like Peregrine Carruthers or whatever it might be. I wanted a really flat, quiet name. And one of my Bibles out here is James Bond's Birds of the West Indies, which is a very famous ornithological book indeed. And I thought, well, now, James Bond, now that's a pretty quiet name. And so I simply stole it and used it.
That's how it happened. So the trouble was, Ian Fleming steals Bond's name, but he never told Jim Bond or his wife that of the theft. And in the early 1960s, just around when Dr. No was coming out, and President Kennedy said that From Russia with Love was one of his favorite novels, Bond and his wife started getting late night calls from breathless young women going, "Hello, can I speak to James, please?" And Mary Bond and James Bond said, "I don't know what's going on." So someone said, "Hey, I just read an interview with Ian Fleming where he said he stole your name." So Mary Bond wrote to Fleming and accused him of identity theft. And Fleming wrote back to her and pretty much confessed to the crime and invited them to drop by GoldenEye in Jamaica whenever they had a chance. So it turns out on February 5th, 1964, Jim Bond and his wife showed up unexpectedly at Ian Fleming's house in Jamaica. Fleming was quite nervous at first, and the first thing he said was, "You're not here to sue me, are you?" And Jim Bond says, "Not at all. I don't even like your books." So they hit it off, and at the end of the day, Ian Fleming wrote this wonderful dedication in You Only Live Twice to the real James Bond from the thief of his identity. Ian Fleming, February 5th, 1964. A great day. After that, Goldfinger came out, and the real James Bond was taking more and more of a backseat to this womanizing secret agent. And it really hit home for Bond in 1965 when he discovered a Eskimo curlew in Barbados. It was supposed to be extinct, and a hunter down there found it, thought it was really unusual, saved it for Bond. Bond, as soon as he saw it, said, "My goodness, that is a bird that was supposed to be extinct for 10 years." So he wrote it up in the scientific journals, and typically it would make the like the auk in the ornithology magazines, but things had changed because now it was James Bond who discovered this bird. And I started to look up in the newspapers, and like 70 newspapers in the United States wrote about James Bond nailing an old bird. You can just imagine the jokes. James Bond, the real thing, gets the bird, the real thing. This James Bond catches birds instead of villains, on and on. And here's Bond, who has written this landmark book, famous ornithologist, and all of a sudden he's just the butt of shaken, not stirred jokes. And, you know, you have a gun under your coat, and all. He just got really tired of it. I think the worst of it came after he died. Bond died in 1989. In 2002, Pierce Brosnan showed up in Die Another Day, I think this was called, and posing as James Bond. And he's actually carrying a copy of Birds of the West Indies. And he goes into a hotel in the movie, and I'm going to show you a scene here. Oops, I think I cut the scene out, but it was a little racy. But Pierce Brosnan says he's in Havana just here for the birds because he's an ornithologist. So the ornithology links just keep going. This is a German cartoon. Donald Duck is Null Null Duck, which is like 00 Duck, I guess, in No Time to Duck. And I'm sure James Bond is probably rolling over in his grave outside of Philadelphia. One other item, another appearance by James Bond in a docudrama.
The following day, I heard from my publishers that Commander Bond's adventures had done. What should I with this stuff? The rest is history. 12 books, isn't it? Can't think what my readers will do to me if I kill him off now. At the end of the day,
Fleming A
Bond's
Goldeneye.
Don't you think?
So sorry. I realize you're making a film.
Yeah.
Name's Bond. James Bond.
I wanted to meet you all my life.
I see you have a copy of my book.
Indeed.
I don't suppose you'd be good enough to sign it for me, will you?
It is a pleasure to have pen. Pen.
He doesn't ever have
Fame indeed.
From a thief who stole your identity.
Thank you, I'm most grateful.
So Bond still lives on with all these Ian Fleming documentaries. So gotten lost in all of this is Bond the Conservationist. And when I came here to Hawk Mountain, I realized there's a stronger Hawk Mountain connection with Jim Bond than I had realized. A lot of the concerns that Bond wrote about in the introduction to Birds of the West Indies were ahead of their time. He wrote about the illegal parrot trade, but he also talked about like stop clear cutting rainforests for plantations. But he also talked about the need to create national parks where hunting was, where no hunting was allowed. And when I thought about this, I said, you know, this is back when Jim Bond was friends with Rosalie Edge, and what he was advocating for the the Caribbean was pretty much what happened at Hawk Mountain, where you said no more gunning of birds, and you create these sanctuaries where no hunting is allowed. And I think that Hawk Mountain really had a strong influence on him. Bond wrote, "There can be no doubt the principal factor that has resulted in the extinction or rarity of so many West Indian birds is man." And you think of all the hawks shot at Hawk Mountain, and it's that same terrible feeling. So it's no surprise that I learned that Jim Bond was a fan of Hawk Mountain. There's a great publication, I think it was in the AUK, called 3 Seasons at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary by Maurice Brune. And I'm looking through it, and the last page is the Emergency Conservation Committee, which helped buy Hawk Mountain thanks to Rosalie Edge. And on the board of directors was none other than Mr. James Bond, way back in the early 1930s when he was actually writing Birds of the West Indies. Bond knew Maurice Brune. They spoke at conferences together and contributed to a book with Maurice Brune. Emmett Blake, James Bond, and Maurice Brune are all listed together. One little side note, Emmett Blake during World War II was a spy. And James Bond visited Hawk Mountain. And I found out a guy named Franklin Haas wrote that they were doing some sort of new Haba bird watching club, and they as a joke, and they wanted people to contribute. And one of the 30 people who signed up was none other than James Bond himself. So today I was at the Acopian Center, and they had this incredible library there. And I looked, and the Acopian Library has 5 of the many editions of the James Bond's Birds of the West Indies. And the one in the middle there with the brown cover and no dust jacket is the one from 1947, and that's worth a couple $100 sitting on the shelf. So I opened up the volumes hoping to find Jim Bond's signature. No such luck, but I did find that one of the books was donated by Rosalie Edge's son, Peter Edge, in June 2001, year before he died. So that's James Bond's legacy. And the other legacy is that Bond brought us here tonight, albeit remotely, to celebrate him, beautiful birds, and amazing places like Hawk Mountain. So thanks for watching. My book blog is therealjamesbond.net. A lot of links on how to order the book. And you can also buy a signed copy online at the Hawk Mountain website. And you can also buy it at the gift shop. I was very pleased to see The Real James Bond and Hawk Mountain on display there. The photographer, Kevin Watson, and I have both signed the Hawk Mountain book, and hope you can pick up a copy. We've donated 20 copies, and they all go to benefit Hawk Mountain because we can't thank them enough. So my book blog is therealjamesbond.net, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I thank you for listening.
Wow, Jim, thank you so much. That was wonderful. And you're very funny. I was definitely laughing out loud several times. Good thing I was muted. We're going to move into questions, Q&A from the audience. So we have one question, and one of the questions actually, let's see, it's actually from your public service announcement, which of course is so important. I'm glad you said that about the rat poison. And so the question is, I've heard some pest companies are saying that they use rat poisons that do not hurt predators or don't have secondary poisoning. Is that accurate? I personally don't know the answer to that, Jim. I don't know if you do.
I think there are some that do. There's the second generation rat poisons make a raptor die slowly. And so the rat will go eat poison for 4 days before it dies. In its weakened state, the raptor eats it. And if we use the first generation poisons, they won't eat as there's not as much poison in their systems. The problem with these first generation rat poisons is they should not be used during nesting season when a raptor may bring a poisoned mouse back to the nest. So that's the way to go if you have to choose between. It's the lesser of two evils, I guess you'd say.
Thank you for elaborating on that. Okay, we have a bond question coming in.
All right. I think it's all right.
Yeah. Can you talk about the bond line that separates the Caribbean avifauna from South America's?
Sure. So Jim Bond, one of his discoveries was he thought that birds in the Caribbean came from North America, not South America, which was generally assumed. And he wrote a famous paper on it back just before Birds of the West Indies came out. And he had a thing called the Bond line. And David Lack, who did Darwin's Finches, later said this should be called the Bond line because this is a significant discovery. I think that's what the question was about. There's also a second Bond line in Haiti, and it is where certain mammals on one side of the line are different than mammals on the other. And it turned out the island was separated at one point with a lot of water between it. And it eventually came together. And a famous naturalist who discovered a new rodent down there named it after James Bond and the Bond line in Haiti. Now that's probably too much information, right?
Never too much, never too much. Okay, another question. Who owns the Golden Eye property now? Do you know the history of when Ian purchased it?
Yes, Ian Fleming purchased it right after World War II. He visited it with his friend Ivar Bryce during a submarine conference in Jamaica, fell in love with the island and decided he wanted to have a second home there. It was a donkey racing course, and he got it for next to nothing. And it was just a little bungalow. And after he died, Chris Blackwell, who produced Island Records and discovered Bob Marley, basically, he owns the place and turned it into a huge resort. And the Fleming bungalow is now called the Fleming Villa, and it rents for about $6,000 a night. And it is a beautiful place to visit. My wife and I had brunch there, and it was great. We could still see some of the birds that Ian Fleming wrote about in his books were still on the site and beloved there. One thing I didn't mention, but if you read Ian Fleming's novels, these 007 novels often have birds in them. And the birds are omens. And I won't say anything more, but if you read these books again, you'll have a new appreciation for kling-klings and kingfishers and other birds.
Nice, thank you. We have many more questions coming in, Jim.
Okay.
Was Bond a volunteer ornithologist all his life, or did he actually get paid?
He never got paid, as far as I know. And during the Depression, it worked in his favor because they didn't have to fire him. He wasn't getting paid anyway. So he hung around. I'm not sure he ever got paid. He did come into a bit of money when he was about 1950 or so. Another Roebling died, I think, and he came into a decent amount of money. And Mary Bond was a widow, and she had some money as well. So when Bond was in his 50s, he could live comfortably. He used to drive a red sports car even.
Nice. Did the Bonds have children?
No, they did not. They got married. Mary was in her 50s, and so was Jim. So they did not. Too bad.
Yeah. All right, here is another question. how did Bond develop his love of bird watching? Was it in England or on his own?
I think it was with his uncle in Maine, Carol Sargent Tyson, who painted all those wonderful paintings. And they started doing the bird guide to the Mount Desert Island with him. And his estate, that Willowbrook, that huge, beautiful brick building, that's the campus of Gwynedd Mercy University. And I visited there, and they let me walk around the campus. And there was some, bluebirds, all kinds of tanagers. It was just a great place to go birding, and butterflies. And I think Bond, a couple of years he spent there between the death of his sister and the death of his mother, I think they were fairly happy times for him. And when his mother died and he got uprooted and sent to England, I think he was kind of a bitter kid for a while. So I think he got it. I hope I answered the question, but I think he got it from Willowbrook when he was a kid.
Wonderful. Thank you. So now we're going back to the Bond line questions. There's a kind of, I think it popped up in the chat and I missed it while you were talking about it. So that's my bad. So, and I don't know, maybe you have mentioned it, you may have answered this, but I'm not sure because I was, typing and things.
Yeah.
That bond line in Haiti, is there any correspondence between the political boundary now on Hispaniola, the line that separates Haiti from Dominican Republic?
That's a great question, but no. This one's solely in Haiti, and it just is a physical boundary, not an imaginary one drawn up by politicians.
Thank you. So the next question is, have you started any new books or projects?
Yeah, so I mentioned I'm working on a Screech Owl book now, and it's been a lot of fun and a huge education. The one thing I learned about Screech Owls is don't think you know anything about them, because I've had a camera in my backyard for years and years, and they never cease to surprise me.
Ooh. I'm going to have to read your book. Wonderful. So I feel like we went through all the questions now.
Great.
We'll see if another one pops up, but I just want to remind everyone what an opportunity, because Jim Wright is at Hawk Mountain now as we speak. And Jim, is it true that you are going to be around this weekend? If people want to come to Hawk Mountain, they can purchase your books in our bookstore, mentioned, and you could, a little bird told me you might even be willing to do a little personal inscription or
Absolutely.
autograph.
And
So,
you can order ahead and tell me how you want it signed, and I will come by and sign it.
wonderful.
And if I'm there when you're there, I would be happy to meet people and talk about Hawk Mountain or Jim Bond.
Sounds wonderful. And also a reminder, if you can't make it to Hawk Mountain from where you are, you can order Jim's books from our online store, so which I'm sure you can access through our website. So just the comments coming in, Jim, just saying thank you to you for a wonderful presentation. So
Great.
Thank you so much. I know I learned a lot and I really enjoyed it. It was very entertaining. And a huge thank you to our wonderful audience for joining us. We always appreciate when we can connect with you virtually. And that being said, we hope to see you on the mountain soon. Very exciting. Spring migration is right around the corner. We start our count on April 1st, and our free weekend programs, which include live raptor presentations free, begin the first weekend in April. And I always love to end just promoting some other education programs we have coming up at Hawk Mountain. This Saturday, we have feather painting, and we will be meeting some parrots that day for that class. This Sunday, we have yoga on the mountain. Then as the end of Women's History Month of March to celebrate, we have a free virtual program the 29th of March, and that's the Women of Hawk Mountain panel. So that's going to be a really wonderful discussion. It's also Youth Art Month contest. So all entries are due by the 31st of March. And of course, we're so excited for migration, and we hope everyone comes to see us for our weekend programs. And then we have outdoor nature sketching on the 9th of April and wire tree workshop on the 9th of April. So that's all for now, and we hope to see everyone on the mountain soon. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
Take care.